This is an exciting day for us. We look forward to it all year. There's all the back and forth of who we get to try, and we, rabbis, we think that just try somebody that's kind of like a jerk in the Torah. Our council remind me that being a jerk is not a crime. Rabbi Feinstein, who was a teacher and a mentor and a friend, and I look forward to this part every year.
Good morning. How's everyone today? Welcome to the Biblical Trial. This morning, we just want to take a moment. When this program began, 15 years ago, the presiding judge was Judge Joseph Wapner, who we lost this year. So I want to take a moment and remember Joe for the mensch he was, for the jurist he was, for the man of justice he was, the man of the community that he was, and to hold his memory very close, a very wonderful soul. Let's take a moment and just remember Joseph. And in his honor, we're really going to call this the Jewish People's Court. So, you have your handouts? Well, good morning. We're going to be studying the book of Jonah this morning, which is a very short book of the Hebrew Bible. You remember that the Hebrew Bible is divided into 3 parts. The Torah, the first 5 books. The next books are called prophets, and the end is called writings. This book is a book of prophecy. It comes in the end of the section of prophets. There's a long anthology of what's called minor prophets. Minor prophets are not underage, and they're not insignificant. They just happen to have shorter books. And this one's only four chapters. I gave you the whole book here on this sheet. You have the whole book of Jonah. Those of you who attend synagogue and stay awake, this is read at mincha time on Yom Kippur. So if you want to put yourself in the mood, get hungry, cranky, grumpy, smelly, angry, you'll enjoy the book. Shall we? Let's begin. Ready? Let's begin. The word of the Lord came to Jonah, son of Amittai. Stop a second. Did you notice that? No, you didn't notice that. So what didn't you notice? No timestamp. Every book of prophecy begins with a timestamp. It says, in the days of King so-and-so, in the time of King so-and-so, after such and such an event, the prophecy of so-and-so began. So that it sets it in a historical moment, because the prophets were historical characters. The book of Jonah doesn't begin with that. It doesn't have a time stamp. Therefore, for most of Jewish history, most readers read this as a parable. That this really wasn't a real person, and this prophecy was really never delivered. This is a story. Now, why do you tell a parable? Because you want to convey a very deep truth. And sometimes the best way to convey a deep truth is not to say it directly, discursively, philosophically. The best way to deliver a deep truth is to tell a story. Because in a story, I can encompass many different versions, many different nuances of that truth. Now, what is going to be the truth of this book? At the end, you're going to get to decide that, but as long as I'm here, I'll tell you. They taught us in rabbi school, you should always give them the end of the sermon first. That way, when they fall asleep, they don't miss it, you know. In mathematics or in logic, you have a proposition. Let's call it X. And you have its opposite, not X. In logic and mathematics, those two are incongruent. It can't be X and not X. It's either black or white, day or night, here or there. It's one or the other. You can't have both. But when it comes to human affairs, when it comes to things of the heart and the soul, it's always X and not X. Always. We call that dialectic. Two ideas which are opposite and are both true. We call that polarity. Two ideas which are opposite and both true. We call that tension. My teacher, Rabbi Schulweis, described this visually as a pendulum. You have truth and you have truth, and so long as the pendulum swings between them, you have captured the truth. If you stop the pendulum anywhere along the way and say, this is truth, or this is truth, or this is truth, that's not true. In order to truly capture the complexity of human being, you have to have X and not X. You know the very famous story a complainant comes to the rabbi and says, Rabbi, I've been cheated, I've been disrespected, it's a terrible thing. And he lays out the whole story, and it's my neighbor, it's his fault. The neighbor comes running in and says, Rabbi, it's not my fault, it's his fault. Let me tell you the story. The rabbi turns to the first one and says, you're right. And then he says, but what about me, Rabbi? He says, you're right. And the Rebbitzin runs in and says, Rabbi, it can't be that he's right and he's right. And the rabbi says, you're right too. In other words, to be a Jew means to be able to hold two contradictory thoughts in your head at the same time. This book asks you to do that. This book is going to talk about two very basic modes of being for Jewish faith. Universalism and particularism. Concern for our own and concern for the world. Loyalty to our own and loyalty to the world. Us and them. And you can understand, we don't know when the book was written, but we can guess that the book was written at a time when the small villages of Canaan, of Palestine, of Israel, began to dissolve and people were moving into great cities. When you live in a village, you live with people who look just like you. Your identity is firm. You know who you are because everybody looks like you and everybody worships like you and everybody thinks like you and everybody lives like you and you know who you are. But you move into a big city and suddenly you are faced with a metropolis of cosmopolitan identities. Everyone is different. Everyone worships different, eats different, lives different, talks different. Who am I? And there is a sense of diffusion of identity. That is a very uncomfortable place to be, this diffusion of identity. And in a moment of diffusion of identity, what you want to do is assert, I am me. And the only way that you can do that is say, I am me, because I'm not you. And you divide the world into clear binaries. Us, them. Our people, those people. The ones who really matter, the ones who I don't have to worry about whatsoever. The folks here, the folks there. And if you'll excuse a political phrase, you build a wall. And you build a wall not for the reason that's ostensibly given. It's not to keep them out. It's to keep us in. Because you're so fearful of the diffusion of identity that you want to build that wall so that we remember who we are. Because we're not them. We're us. They're the other. We're the ones who matter. They're the other. That's what the book of Jonah is all about. Take a look with me. Ready? The word of the Lord came to Jonah, son of Amittai. Go at once to Nineveh, that great city, and proclaim judgment upon it, for their wickedness has come before me. Nineveh. Anybody happen to know where Nineveh is? Nineveh is in Mesopotamia. Today you call it Mosul. Nineveh, remember that Canaan, Palestine, Israel, our homeland, sits on a highway between two great empires. To the north and east, the empires of Mesopotamia. To the south and west, the empires of Egypt. We happen to live on the highway. Bad choice. Because whoever is ascendant, whoever wants to control the world, has to come over that highway and take us out. And that's been the story of our history. The first great empire to do this was an empire called, in Hebrew, Ashur. In English, we call them the Assyrians. The Assyrians are a northern Mesopotamian power. The first great Assyrian city-state was Nineveh. They mustered enough power to come across the Fertile Crescent, down the coastline, and smash the northern kingdom of Israel, destroying it. They took away its leading citizens back to the empire. That's the 10 lost tribes. They did not end up in Utah. Of this I am quite sure. They ended up in Assyria, where they assimilated into the Assyrian Empire. Then the Assyrians came to Jerusalem, and they encircled the city of Jerusalem, took all of its treasures, threatened its king, and it was only because there was a coup d'etat back in Ashur, back in Nineveh, that the Assyrians didn't smash Jerusalem too, but it left it bereft and weak. Nineveh is the capital of Assyria. Nineveh is the capital of evil. Nineveh are the people who wanted us dead. Nineveh is, take your choice, Berlin. And the prophet's told what? God says to the prophet, I'm going to smash Nineveh. And the prophet says, yes. Finally, some divine retribution for those bastards and what they did to us. Finally, I'm going to see Nineveh destroyed for what they did to the Israelites. But wait a minute, you're a prophet. What's your job? Your job is to go to that city and preach on the theory that if they repent, God will forgive them. No, that can't be. You can't forgive those people. They're inveterately evil. They're horrible. I want them dead. I don't want them forgiven. I don't want them rescued. I want them dead. I'm not going to go there. So what does Jonah do? Jonah, however, starts to flee. I don't want my enemy dead. I don't want my enemy redeemed. I want him dead. God, do your thing. I'll go and watch. I'll buy popcorn and watch. But don't forgive them. So Jonah doesn't want to take the chance. So he splits. He splits to Tarshish. What's Tarshish? Crete. So he's told to go to Mosul, which is north and east, and he ends up going to Crete, which is south and west. To get to Crete, how do you have to go? Right, you go to the airport and fly. You get to Tarshish from the Lord's service. He went down to Jaffa, found a ship going to Tarshish, paid the fare, and went aboard to sail with the others to Tarshish, away from the service of the Lord. Now you have to see the visual here. He lives in Jerusalem, which is up. It's on top of a hill. To get from Jerusalem down to Jaffa, you've got to go down. Once you're in Jaffa, you want to go down to the harbor, so you got to go down. Once you're in the harbor, you find a ship, you pay the fare, you step down into the ship. And once you're down into the ship, you want to get away from everybody because you don't want anyone to know who you are. You go down into the hold of the ship. Down, 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 instead of going up, up, up. But the Lord cast a mighty wind upon the sea. You can't get away from God. And such a great tempest came upon the sea that the ship was in danger of breaking up. The mighty ship was tossed. If not for the courage of the fearless crew, Jonah would be lost. The ship set ground. No, that's another story. In their fright, the sailors cried out. Now, who is on this ship? This is a ship made up of sailors from all over the world. Anyone ever take a cruise? Anyone here ever take a cruise? Your cabin boy is from Tanzania, and your waiter's from Lithuania, and the bartender's from Tarzana, right? And the cruise director is from Mars or something. And the captain, he gets on this. You ever think this captain always gets on the loudspeaker every day with announcements? And he's from God knows where, somewhere in the East Mediterranean. Today's going to be a very nice day on the ocean. It's warm, it's cloudy, and you're going to feel a few waves. Don't worry, we are knowing what we are doing. It's a wonderful thing. So this is the ship he's on, right? It's like this international ship. And as the ship starts to rock and roll and the waves start to toss it, each one of these sailors starts to pray to his own God. Remember, there's a beautiful scene in Moby Dick that mirrors the same thing. Each one prays to his own God. And because they couldn't save the ship, they do the next most radical thing. How does a sailor make money? He moves cargo from here to there. It's a cargo ship, right? The cargo is his parnassa, it's his money. If he doesn't deliver the cargo, he doesn't get paid. But they couldn't save the ship, so in order to save themselves and save the ship and save their passenger, what are they going to do? They flung the ship's cargo overboard to make it lighter for them. So here are these guys working frantically to save this ship, giving up all the money they would have made from this journey, and they throw the cargo overboard, trying to save the ship, but it doesn't help. Jonah, meanwhile, had gone down into the hold of the vessel, where he lay down and fell asleep. Do you hear the down? So what's the image here? The image is we are all on the same boat. And this boat is being rocked and rolled in the waves of history. And here are these sailors. And these sailors have an ethic. What is the maritime ethic? Protect my passenger. Protect my passenger at all costs. Protect my passenger, even if it means giving up my livelihood. Protect my passenger, even if it means risking my life. Protect my passenger. So on the deck, they are running frantically to protect the ship and protect the passenger. And what is Jonah doing? Sleeping. The world is going to hell, and the Jew on the boat is sleeping. And the captain comes down. Now, I told you this before, about 7 years ago when we did this before. Or last year or the year, I don't know. When you read a biblical text, look for the question. Whenever someone asks a question, that is the meaning of the text. The entire text is written as a midrash, as an interpretive tool to get us to the question. What's the first question asked in the Hebrew Bible? God finds Adam hiding in the garden, and he says, Ayeka, where are you? Which is really the great question of all faith. Where are you in your life, right? A little bit later, God's going to ask Cain, where is your brother? And Cain is going to ask, am I my brother's keeper, right? And Abraham is going to ask God over Sodom and Gomorrah, shall the judge of all the earth not do justice? Look for the question. The question is the soul of the text. Here, there are two questions in the book of Jonah that I want you to notice. So I put them in bold print. Here's the first one. The captain goes over to him. Who's the captain? By the way, this book is ferociously anti-Semitic. I just want to make sure you understand that. But because we wrote it, it's okay. Because the captain's not Jewish. The captain never went to Hebrew school or Camp Ramah or Brandeis Bardin. The captain never went to a nifty event. The captain doesn't know our ethic of social justice. The Catholic never sat at a long Pesach Seder discussing immigrant rights. The captain is a non-Jew. He's the people that Jonah doesn't want to save. And the captain wakes up the Jew on the boat and he says, how can you be sleeping? That's the question of the text. The world is going to hell and you're doing what? You're sleeping? That's why this is a great text for Yom Kippur afternoon. You're hungry? You're hungry? Do you know how many children in this city are hungry today? You're uncomfortable? Do you know how many children in this city don't have a place to sleep tonight? You're out of sorts? Do you know how many elderly people don't have a place to be in the world? Why are you sleeping? It's a hell of a question to ask. Up, call upon your God. Perhaps the God will be kind to us and we won't perish. I need everybody to pray now, he says. So the men said to one another, let's cast lots. When you have no other way to make a decision, this is a great way to do it. Cast lots. We'll draw straws. The guy whose straw is the short straw, it's his God who's angry at us, right? Let's cast lots and find out on whose account this misfortune has come upon us. So they cast lots, and wouldn't you know it, the lot fell on Jonah. These are sailors talking to their passenger, and they said, tell us, you who have brought this misfortune upon us, what is your business? Where have you come from? What is your country? Of what people are you? And he says, I am a Hebrew. When Jews identify themselves to outsiders in the Bible, it's always by the language of Hebrew. I worship Lord, God of heaven, who made both sea and land. And the men were greatly terrified. They asked him, what have you done? What have you done to piss off your God? I mean, you must have done. What did you do? And when the men learned that he was fleeing from the service of the Lord, they told him, what must we do to make the sea calm around us? For the sea was growing more and more stormy. And he answered them, heave me overboard, and the sea will calm down for you, for now I know the terrible storm came upon you on my account. Heave me overboard. Does that sound a little strange to anybody? What could he have said? I'll jump. I'll jump. Wouldn't that make more sense? I'll jump. What's the difference between I'll jump and heave me overboard? I take no responsibility for what happens to you. I am not an actor in this drama. I am passive. Heave me overboard. Pick me up like an object and throw me. But I won't do a damn thing to save you guys. Does that sound familiar? That's the very reason why he's running away. Because he didn't want to go save Nineveh. because he believes that all of his loyalties are with the Jewish people, with the Israelites. He doesn't want to go save Nineveh. So when it comes time to save these sailors, he doesn't even want to save them. Heave me overboard, but don't ask me to do anything. I'm not involved. Heave me overboard. Now that would be the logical thing, because he told them to do it. But these are sailors, and sailors have an ethic. And now you have the contrast between the Jew who has heard the word of God at Mount Sinai and these sailors who are a bunch of pagans, and yet they have an ethic. They have a natural ethic. And what is their natural ethic? Save my passenger. They have a higher sense of ethics than this person who is supposed to be God's chosen one. See why it's an anti-Semitic book? It's not an anti-Semitic book. It's a self-critical book. So what happens? Nevertheless, that's a great word. The men rowed hard to regain the shore. They went back to rowing. They went back to struggling. They used all of their techniques as sailors to try to save themselves. But when it was clear that this storm was uncanny, it was unnatural, they realized there was no other choice. Right? But when they could not, the sea was growing more and more stormy. Then they cried to the Lord. Before they do what they know they need to do, they make a prayer. I mean, they take a moment. You've been on a rocking boat, and you feel the strain of the boat. It's about to come apart. But they stop and make a prayer because they have a sense of propriety and ethics. And what's their prayer? Oh, please, Lord, do not let us perish on account of this man's life. Do not hold us guilty of killing an innocent person. For you, O Lord, by your will, you've brought this about. We didn't want this. This is all we can do. And they heaved Jonah overboard, and the sea stopped raging. And what happens to Jonah? The men feared the Lord greatly. They offered a sacrifice. Right? They all became... But what happens? But God's not finished with this guy. Now, that should be the end of the book. Right? You run away from God. God doesn't countenance that. So Jonah should be finished, right? But God's not finished. You see, this is a parable, and it's a parable about Jonah. Because the issue isn't saving Nineveh, and the issue isn't saving the boat. The issue is saving you. Saving Jonah. Saving everyone who lives in a binary world of us, them. Our folks, those folks. Everyone who lives behind a wall. So what does God do? The Lord provided a huge fish to swallow Jonah. Not a whale, that's Pinocchio. This is a fish. And Jonah remained in the fish belly 3 days and 3 nights. Why 3 days and 3 nights? Well, you can say 2 days Rosh Hashanah, 1 day Yom Kippur. Fish, huh? So where is he now, by the way? He started in Jerusalem. He went down to Jaffa, down to the harbor, down into the ship, down into the hold, falling asleep. God says, you want to go down? You want to get away from me going down? I'll take you all the way down. Down to the bottom of the sea. What's it like being inside of a fish? Anyone ever been? Never have found anyone who did that. But let's use our imaginations. What does it smell like? Little fishy, would you say? What does it feel like? A little gooey, would you say? What color is it? It's dark. Now, what would you call a place which is dark, warm, gooey, and fishy smelling? What does that remind you of? Could be a womb. Could be a grave. Could be many things, right? You wanted to be in a world where you didn't have to care about anybody. You wanted a world where all of your concern and care would be focused on you and your own, and to hell with everybody else. They're not my problem and not my responsibility. You want a world free of social claims, a world free of ethics, a world where nobody ever disturbs your nice, neatly worked out life. I got one for you. Right here at the bottom of the sea. Because down there in that smelly, dark, icky place, you're never going to have to worry about anybody. You're not responsible for anybody. You don't have to protect anybody. It's a little like death. It's a little like death. Now, if we had more time, we could go through what he thinks about for 3 days. Like, what do you think? What's the first day? First day is, damn them, anger. And what's the second day? Self-pity. Oh, poor me, look what happened to me. And then maybe by the third day, he comes to realize that this is his position. And he gives a psalm. None of the verses of this psalm are original. They're all found in other books of the Bible. This is a compiled psalm. And God hears the prayer. And finally, God commands the fish, and it spewed Jonah out on dry land. Chapter 3. The word of the Lord came to Jonah a second time. Redo. Let's try it again. Word for word, the same story. Go at once to Nineveh, that great city, and proclaim to it what I tell you. So Jonah went at once to Nineveh. He learned his lesson. If he's not committed to saving Nineveh, at least he's committed to staying out of the belly of fishes, right? In self-preservation. Oh, by the way, just as an incidental thing, what did Jonah want most of all? Justice. Nineveh destroyed my people. They deserve justice. But if justice was applied to Jonah, what would you get? He'd be dead. He'd still be in the bottom of the sea. You see, he wants justice for everybody else, but he wants mercy for himself. Everyone else is permitted justice and judgment and punishment and retribution. But for himself, he wants forgiveness, a second chance. He wants a second chance. There's a sort of ethical hypocrisy there. Do you hear it? Let's go back. Ready? This is one of the great biblical jokes about to happen. You're going to laugh hysterically when you see this. Jonah went at once to Nineveh, and according to the Lord's command. Nineveh was an enormously large city, 3 days' walk across. That's a big city, by the way, even today's standards. Jonah started out, made his way into the city, the distance of 1 day's journey, 1 day's walk, and he proclaimed, 40 days more, and Nineveh will be overthrown. The people of Nineveh believed God. They proclaimed a fast, great and small alike, put on sackcloth. When the news reached the king of Nineveh, the guy who destroyed Israel, the emperor, he rose from his throne, took off his robe, put on sackcloth, sat in ashes, had the word cried through Nineveh by decree of the king and all of his nobles, no man or beast, flock or herd shall taste anything. They shall not graze, they shall not drink water. They'll be covered with sackcloth, man and beast, and cry mightily to God. Let everyone turn back from the evil way and injustice of his guilty. Who knows that God may turn and relent? He may turn back from his wrath. We do not perish. And God saw what they did, how they're turning back from their evil way. God renounced the punishment he had planned to bring upon them, and they didn't carry it out. Not laughing. You didn't get the joke? All right, let's go again. I'm going to have to explain it, but it'll still be funny. Jonah goes into the city of Nineveh, the heart of darkness, the world capital of evil. The most destructive kingdom that's ever been, the cruelest place in the world. He goes into that city, stands on a street corner in that city, 5th and Madison. No, 5th and Madison are parallel. Madison and 87th, right? Wilshire and Bundy, right? Stands on that corner and says 4 words. 5 words. Od arba'im yom Nineveh Napechet. 40 days, Nineveh's toast. 4 words. 40 days, Nineveh's toast. What happens? Everybody in Nineveh repents. The king gets off of his throne, sits in sackcloth and ashes. The people of the town begin to repent their ways. Dogs and cats do tshuva. Sheep and cows are fasting and burning their chest and saying vidui. Worms, snakes, frogs, bugs, the whole town of Nineveh. You're not laughing. Why is that funny? Simple. The book of Isaiah is the most exalted book of prophecy in the Bible. The book of Isaiah has 66 chapters of exalted poetic prophecy that Isaiah delivered to the Jews of Jerusalem. How many of them repented? The book of Jeremiah. The book of Jeremiah, 52 chapters of beautiful, beautiful poetic prophecy, begging the people Israel to please repent. How many repented? 0. Jonah speaks 4 words to a city full of evil non-Jews, and they become Hasidim. 40 days, Nineveh's toast. My God! And they change. This is such. Now you get the joke. You see. This is such a. It's biblical satire. It's like if one Jewish prophet ever made it out of this building into the world, he'd change the world. That's what sent Erwin and Laurie out to fix the world already. New, right? So what happens? It works. That's called success. Jonah is, you can write this in your notes, the only successful prophet in the Bible. It's true. He's the only prophet who ever got anybody to change their ways. The only one. Moses didn't. We were fetching until we got to Canaan. Isaiah, Jeremiah, Amos, Hosea, all of the biblical prophets, much more beautiful poetry than his. They didn't change anybody. Jonah's the only prophet ever got anybody to change their ways. So what happens? Ready? This displeased Jonah greatly. What? He's successful. But here's the dynamic of a prophet. If you're successful, you make it possible for the people you're preaching to not get punished. What did he want? He wanted punishment. He wanted to fail. He tried his best to fail. He couldn't. He's so incompetent he couldn't even fail. And he's angry because he wants justice. He doesn't want mercy. Mercy, forgiveness, second chances, bleeding heart liberal values. We need to be strong, hard power. I want a God who puts his foot down and shows him who's in charge, damn it. He prayed to the Lord and said, oh God, isn't just what I said when I was still at home in my country? I knew you were going to do this. I knew it. I knew it. For I knew that. Now watch the next line. It is brilliant. For I knew that you're a compassionate and gracious God, slow to anger, abounding in kindness, renouncing punishment. Now we know those lines. That comes from the book of Exodus. When God forgives the people of Israel for the golden calf, Moses says to him, I want to know who you are. And I'll give you the text here if you want to see it. And God announces to Moses, I'm a God of compassion, a God of forgiveness. And there it's a positive thing. And on Yom Kippur, you read that over and over and over again in the Yom Kippur liturgy. Adonai, Adonai, El Rachum V'Chanun. You know what I'm talking about? Erech Apayim V'Rav Chesed V'Chem. Because you say we depend upon God's goodness and God's forgiveness, and we try to internalize those ethics. But for Jonah, he takes those very words and makes them ironic. I knew you were a compassionate God. Ugh! I knew you were a gracious God. Feh! I knew you're forgiving because you're weak. You're not strong. And what we need is a strong, punishing, punitive God. Now you can point him on the shoulder and say, if that God were the God, you'd be dead at the bottom of the sea, schmuck. But that's not his problem. You see? And then he says, kill me. Take my life. There's a thing called suicide by cop. This is called suicide by prayer. Kill me. I don't want to live in a world with a God who forgives. Because a God who forgives, a God who's merciful, a God who gives second chances, allows evil people to walk around in the world. He isn't the strong God I need to make me feel comfortable in my own skin and in my own world. And here God answers him. And God's answer is not an answer, it's a question. And it's the second question I want you to pay attention to. It's the one I think the book is about as well. God says to him, now the Hebrew is hahetev charalach, which is translated here by the professor, are you that deeply grieved? Are you that? But it's bigger. Hahetev comes from the word tov. Charalach means anger, which means hahetev angerlach. Are you that angry? Is that kind of anger good for you? Is that kind of anger good for you? Or better than that, has all the goodness in you been displaced by your anger? Has anger become the heart of your being? Has rage become your soul? Is that really who you are? And that's who you expect me to be? And at the end of the book, there's a little exercise, but it's not very successful. Jonah sits outside the town. It's a hot day. God makes a bush grow. It gives him a little bit of shade. In the morning, the bush dies. Jonah says, "Why'd you kill my bush?" God says, "You care about a bush, and I'm not supposed to care about this town?" It's a very weak ending, because the question really is the ending. What is at the core of your being? Anger? Rage? Dividing the world, us and them? Defining yourself by who you're not? Or goodness, mercy, graciousness, acceptance? God says, you human being, you can divide. I'm God. I'm one. There is no other in my world. Evil people need to be brought home. People who are different than you need to be brought close. There is no us and them in my world. It's all one humanity, because I'm one God. I don't know if Jonah learned it at the end. The question is whether we learned it.
And now it gets better. Based on all of that, if you are ready, the jury, these are your instructions. For now, I need to ask you to please rise for the Honorable Judge Bert Pines.
Good afternoon. Okay, please be seated. The court is in session. It's my pleasure to again preside over these proceedings. This is the 7th year in which I've had this honor. Can everyone hear me? I just want to make sure. Can you hear me back there? Okay, I'll try to project as best I can and ask the crew back there to turn up the volume if necessary. As you heard, this is our 14th year. I was preceded in this service by a very distinguished judge, Joe Wapner, who many of you probably knew. There was already some mention of him, but a few other things about this man. He was a World War II hero. He was part of the greatest generation, as Tom Brokaw described that generation. He received the Bronze Star and Purple Heart for his service, and as you know, became a great judge, member of our community. As far as I know, he's the only judge who has his own star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. So it's quite an impressive career, and it's an honor for me to now follow in his footsteps. I also have the pleasure of introducing the lawyers, the advocates in this case, two of the nation's most prominent scholars. For the prosecution, let me now introduce Professor Laurie Levinson. Professor Levinson. She's being assisted, and she will introduce her assistant. But just by way of background, for those of you who have not been at one of these trials before, Professor Levinson is a professor at Loyola Law School. She's a former federal prosecutor. How are we doing there? She's an author of books on criminal law and procedure that are used widely by lawyers in this state. She's the director of the Loyola Center for Ethical Advocacy and the Project for the Innocent. Among other things, she was instrumental in getting the state bar to adopt an ethics rule which requires prosecutors to turn over to the defense any exculpatory evidence. You think that would be a normal part of our ethics, but it really was not until her efforts. And as head of the Project for the Innocent, there have been many exonerations, but I think we all recently read about the exoneration of Andrew Wilson, who served 32 years in prison for a crime he did not commit. Thanks to her students and her efforts, he was released. And of course, we often hear from prosecutors about the famous people they have prosecuted, but no one can top Professor Levinson's record here. She's prosecuted Moses and Abraham. I can go on. King Saul, King David, Joseph. So no prosecutor can beat her record. Now, the lawyer who's also represented these distinguished clients and who's now representing the defendants in this case is Dean Erwin Chemerinsky.
So,
Dean Chemerinsky is the founding dean of the School of Law, UC Irvine, which after just a few years from its founding, it was ranked 28th in the nation, the best ranking of any new law school ever. He's a renowned constitutional scholar. He's an author of many books and articles. I really enjoyed a fascinating read, The Case Against the United States Supreme Court, and his latest book is Closing the Courthouse Doors, How Your Constitutional Rights Became Unenforceable. He previously chaired the Los Angeles City Charter Reform Commission, and like Professor Levinson, he's a frequent commentator, a go-to person for the press, very well known and respected by the press. So here we are again. This is, as I said, the 14th year. Last year, like the years before, we said goodbye to each other. We figured that was the last time. And lo and behold, because of popular demand, this event sold out after a half an hour, and we're pleased to, again, proceed with this case. Now, for those of you who have not been here beforehand, this trial is different from many trials you will ever attend or see on television, as you'll soon witness. For one thing, we don't worry about the jury selection. We know that you're all highly qualified. We've dispensed with things like the opening statement, questioning of any witnesses. For obvious reasons, they're all dead, so there's not much we can do here. So we're proceeding right to the closing arguments. And each side will have a closing argument and a chance for rebuttal. The evidence. Wow, got a little feedback here. The evidence is the material you have, as embellished by Rabbi Feinstein, and as I assume, which will be further embellished by Professor Levinson in her presentation. So, without further comments, let's proceed with the case of People versus the Sailors. These defendants have been charged with the crime of attempted murder. A plea of not guilty has been entered. The purpose of this trial is to determine whether the defendants are guilty or not guilty. Professor Levinson, you may now argue for the prosecution.
thank you, Your Honor. Oh yeah, it's not too early to start cheering, I'm just saying. Thank you, Your Honor. May it please the court and my distinguished opposing counsel, and may I take a matter of personal privilege. I've been here, I think, since the earth cooled, trying people, and you've been trying to help the other side. So let's just make it an even fight today. First, let me introduce my law clerk. This has become such a popular event that people now, rather than go to law school, rather come to the American Jewish University to learn their law. And this young lady is Serena Davis. She's a senior in high school, and she's been coming to learn all these years. I also know that there are people who are very curious before we try the case, what's happening with your children, Lori? So I will tell you. My son, Solly, is engaged to be married. My daughter, Javi, has become a lawyer, and she told me that I have the right side on this case. And my daughter, Danny, is finally leaving the nest. So I guess I'll have lots of time to work on these trials in the future. One last thing before we begin the trial. I was told, I must direct you, that all three of my children said that they would love for their mother to finally win a verdict. All right, so let's get started with the trial. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, we have a whale of a story. Oops. Oh, whale of a story this time, right? We have a group of sailors. Whoa. Erwin. All right, we have a whale of a story this time. We have a group of sailors, right, who couldn't control their boat. So what do? They take Jonah, a man of God, a prophet, and they throw him overboard to drown. So what's happening here? Okay, Jonah made a few waves, but, haven't we all? Poor Jonah. He signs up for a voyage, a 3-hour cruise, and he ends up on the Poseidon Adventure. Now, this time, I brought some witnesses for our trial. They may... Yes, you're right, he is guilty. We'll come back. What do we know in this case? We know that Jonah is one of the good ones, right? He's the type of guy that God wants to go around telling other people how to act. He's God's PR man, not Spicer. He's a good one. He's a salesman. He's a spokesperson. But Jonah's just not in the proselytizing mood, so he heads for Tarshish. He's not hurting a soul, right? He's not hurting anyone. He's on his cruise, he's sleeping like a baby, and the captain goes down to wake him up. And he says, "Oi, how can you sleep at a time like this?" And so what happens? These sailors, this captain, they blame the Jew. They always blame the Jew. But this time they blame him for bad weather, and that takes the cake. So they do their scientific experiment, they cast the lots, and they say, "It's on you, Jonah. It must be your fault. You must be one bad dude, one bad hombre who's making this all happen. Because you are the other." Now, Jonah, who is a righteous man, is willing to take the fall for them. He doesn't resist when they physically lift him up and toss him into the sea. He is perfectly well expecting to die, because that's what an attempted murder is. But this is crucial. The men, as you heard the rabbi say, knew they shouldn't do it. They knew they shouldn't do it because it is against the law. And your text will tell you that. It says, if you look at your text in line 14, focus on the key language. They say, we're going to do this. We know it's a crime. Maybe don't punish us as much. Do not hold us. And can you help me read the word in yellow, everybody? Can't hear it. Oh, can you say it again? One more time. Guilty, right? Do not hold me guilty for killing an innocent man. Because frankly, they know that there is no legal defense to that. You can't just kill somebody because they're making waves. Maybe you can ask for a little rachmanis. That's a legal term during sentencing. But it is not a defense in this case. And what do the defendants do? They throw him into the water where they expect, not just expect, hope he will die, because that gets rid of their problems. Now, the judge will instruct you on attempted murder. All it says is exactly what we just heard. If you have people, the sailors, who take a direct step towards killing Jonah, and they didn't care whether he sank or swam, they just wanted him out there, then they're going to be guilty. And why? Wait for it. Because they are killing an innocent man. Now, that doesn't mean Jonah is a mensch, but that's not the legal issue in this case. He is not attacking them. He's not a guilty person under the law. He is somebody on the boat. Now, my esteemed colleague here is bound to come up with a whopping fish story for this one. I think we might refer to it as alternative facts. And you know, he always does make a big splash with this group out here. And he'll try to explain why it was okay for them, the sailors, to choose their lives over Jonah. Why it was reasonable or necessary for them to decide they were more important than Jonah. But you know what? They didn't even bother to throw him a lifeline. How hard would it have been to say, yo, Jonah, maybe that'll help you out? Or how about a few little floaties to get him through? And even, Jonah was quite small at the time, even a life preserver might have helped. But no, all they did was throw him overboard. Let me talk to you a little bit about what I suspect the defense will say today. And keep in mind, I don't think it holds any water. The defense. The judge will read you an instruction that is actually entitled self-defense, right? Or defense of others. But you know why that defense won't work. Jonah wasn't attacking the sailors. He was sleeping like a baby. He was, as the text says, an innocent man. And the law does not allow you to sacrifice a person for another innocent person. Self-defense is all about aggressors. If Jonah were attacking the sailors, but that's nowhere in the text. And it's also not allowed, either under Jewish law or the law of today, for you to say it's more necessary. Hey, I'm more important. Somebody wanted me to go to Nineveh, or somebody didn't want me to go to Nineveh. I'm a sailor. I've got to sail the boat. I'm choosing my life over another. We have seen too much in history, and we know those times, where people have said, you know, yeah, just take our Jews. It'll save the rest of us. That is not a defense, and it's not a defense today. Jonah is becoming a sacrifice to God. There's a reason in the text that we are told that they are pagans and they worship to other gods, because that misleads them into thinking you could do something like this, which is to sacrifice an innocent person. And frankly, as we said, even if they were so confused, and even if Jonah said, you know, look, okay, it's my fault, they did nothing to help him survive this. Not a floaty. Hold up that floaty there. A little faster. There you go. Not a life preserver, and not a vest. Absolutely nothing, because they didn't care. They were selfish, and they were thinking of themselves. They didn't care that Jonah may take the die for them. As I mentioned, there are lots of problems with this defense, especially self-defense. But you might be thinking about, what about some other things in this story? What about the idea that maybe Jonah consented? Consent is not a defense to homicide. And you know that to be true, right? Because your body doesn't even belong to you. Who does your body belong to? Hashem, to God, right? And that is the essence of law. So I can't say, you know what? I'm having another terrible day at the AGU trial. Erwin's beating me up, or even worse, I hate suffering in this world. Just kill me. That's actually not a defense. Assisted suicide is not a defense to this case because he didn't want to die. He didn't have a prescription to die. He didn't need to die. Instead, these sailors were treating Jonah like chum. Hey, fishy, fishy, come get him. The defendants did not do everything they could here, exhaust every alternative. They did a little bit of rowing, they threw over a little bit of cargo, but think of the things they didn't do. Would it have been so hard for them to say, okay, Jonah, let's bring you back to Nineveh? Because everybody knew that would calm the seas down. Did they ever ask him to do that? Help us help you. They never asked that. Instead, they went with the fast, easy solution, get rid of the problem. There is no defense of necessity or duress for homicide. Sometimes, ladies and gentlemen, life puts you between a rock and a hard place. The teaching of our tradition is that you don't get to make that choice. Even in this story, God teaches that lesson. They try to appease God. Here, take him, swallow him. But God doesn't want Jonah to die. He wants him to go somewhere. And these sailors could have gotten them there. So, in my initial conclusion, I know my esteemed colleague will try to justify what happened here. As I mentioned, his story was all wet. But let's think about what the rule of law would say. The rule of law would teach us it wasn't necessary to throw Jonah in. They didn't ask him to repent. They did not reverse course. They didn't even ask him, hey, would you jump in yourself? Instead, they took the law in their own hands. And that is not reasonable. That is not a defense, and that is why, forevermore, feeding a person to the fishes, right, makes you guilty of a crime. Thank you very much.
Okay, Dean Chemerinsky, you may now argue for the defense.
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, it's wonderful to appear before you again. Judge Pines, it's wonderful to be in your court. And this is not a so-called judge. This is a real judge. I'm tempted to say there's something very fishy about the story you just told. I wasn't going to do bad puns, but she started it. Do you know what a whale's favorite meal is? Fish and chips. Do you know why the whale crossed the road? To get to the other tide. Okay, one more. Do you know how to circumcise a whale? You send down 4 skin divers. Unlike my wonderful opposing counsel, I am not going to invoke my children to get your sympathy. But let me tell you all about my grandchildren. I should be serious. My clients have been charged with very serious offenses, attempted murder and manslaughter. Ultimately, the question before you as jurors is, did the sailors act reasonably under the circumstances? I think when you carefully review the facts that are before you and the law as you'll be instructed about it, there's only one possible verdict on both counts: not guilty. And in fact, my presentation to you is quite simple. I want to focus on 3 questions. First, what happened? Second, what is the law? And third, how does that law apply to these facts? So let's start with what happened. Now, I listened very carefully to Professor Levinson. It really was alternative facts. She begins by saying that what's going on here is the sailors couldn't control their ship. Now, I ask you to read very carefully the record before you, the facts. That's not what it says. In fact, to invoke what's already been mentioned, if not for the courage of the fearless crew, the ship would have been lost. What exactly happens? Jonah is given a command from God. He's told to go to Nineveh and give them a decree. But he decides not to do so. He decides, as Rabbi Feinstein said, to exactly in the opposite direction. Perhaps it was he was a coward. Maybe as he wanted to see Nineveh, the enemy of Israel, destroyed. But there's no doubt that Jonah triggers all that happens by not listening to the decree from God. Why do we know this? It's what it says. And you should read it. The word of the Lord came to Jonah. Go at once to Nineveh, that great city, and proclaim judgment upon it, for their wickedness has come before me. Jonah, however, started to flee to Tarshish, exactly the opposite direction from the Lord's service. And he found a ship going to Tarshish. Now, Professor Levinson repeatedly wants you to see Jonah as this innocent individual. You should see Jonah, as the text says, a person who's responsible for all that happens. What then occurs when he's on the ship? The Lord creates, in response to that, an enormous storm that puts the ship in peril. Again, how do you know that? The text says so. It says, the Lord cast a mighty wind upon the sea, and such a great tempest came upon the sea that the ship was in danger of breaking up. So, the sailors do what they can. They throw things overboard to lighten the weight of the ship. Where is Professor Levinson's hero during all of this? Sleeping underneath of the ship. They find him and they say, how can you be sleeping so soundly? Well, they start to figure out that Jonah is responsible for this. They say to him, tell us, you who have brought this misfortune upon us, what is your business? Again, it's not that Jonah is this innocent person. You're told Jonah is responsible for this. And then Jonah says to them, because I'm responsible, throw me overboard. But do they throw him overboard? No. As Rabbi Feinstein said, they do what sailors always are trained to do, to protect the passenger. And so they say, nevertheless, the men rowed hard to regain the shore. But they could not, for the sea was growing more and more stormy about them. At this point, they had only one choice. Either, as they perceived it, throw Jonah overboard, or the sailors and all of those who were on board, all of the passengers, all of the innocent people would perish. And so at this moment, they throw Jonah overboard. Those are the facts. So that brings me to my second question, what's the law? And Professor Levinson has done something new today. We've all heard of alternative facts. She presents you alternative law. The judge is going to instruct you as to the law. And ultimately, what he's going to tell you is, the question is this justifiable homicide, self-defense or defense of another? That's the question you have to ask yourselves as you vote. Is this justifiable homicide, self-defense or defense of another? And in that regard, you need to ask three questions. First, did the sailors reasonably believe that they and the lives of others were in imminent danger? Second, did they reasonably believe that throwing Jonah overboard would save their lives and the lives of others? And third, did they reasonably believe that there was no alternative way to save their lives and the lives of others? You'll notice in each sentence there is the word reasonable. I'm not making this up. This is the law that you're meant to apply. These are the instructions that Judge Pines will read to you. The defendants are not guilty of attempted murder or attempted voluntary manslaughter. Those are the two charges. The defendants are not guilty of attempted murder or attempted voluntary manslaughter if they were justified in attempting to kill someone in self-defense or defense of another. The defendants acted in lawful self-defense or defense of another, and then there's 3 points. First, 1, the defendants reasonably believed that they or someone else was in imminent danger of being killed or suffering great bodily injury. 2, the defendants reasonably believed that the immediate use of deadly force was necessary to defend against that danger. And 3, the defendants used no more force than was reasonably necessary to defend against that danger. That's why I said to you, the central question is, did the defendants, the sailors, act reasonably under the circumstances? We don't look at it from the perspective of now. Your burden is to look at it from the perspective of the sailors at the time this occurred. Again, why should you believe that? Because that's what the judge is going to tell you as to the law. I'm quoting, when deciding whether the defendant's beliefs were reasonable, consider all the circumstances as they were known and appeared to the defendant, and consider a reasonable person in a similar situation with similar knowledge would have believed. If the defendant's beliefs were reasonable, the danger does not need to have actually existed. Now, one thing that Professor Levinson doesn't want to talk about is who has the burden of proof here. If you have doubt, how do you have to vote? As in all cases, the prosecution has the burden of proof. If you have any reasonable doubt, you must vote not guilty. And again, you don't have to take my word for it. The judge will instruct you. The people have the burden of proving that the attempted killing was not justified. If the people have not met this burden, you must find the defendants not guilty of attempted murder or attempted voluntary manslaughter. So now that I've reviewed the facts, now that I've described the law, we get to my final point. How here does the law apply to these facts? We'll go back to the 3 questions that I said you have to ask. First, were the sailors reasonably believing there was imminent threat to their lives and the lives of others? It's clear from the text they were reasonably believed. You're told at the outset that they had reason to believe their ship would be destroyed. And then you're told the storm even got worse. Second, did they have reason to believe that throwing Jonah overboard would save their lives and the lives of others on the ship? And again, the text tells you the answer to this. In fact, Jonah even said to them, "Throw me overboard because I'm responsible." Now, I'm not arguing to you that this is an attempted assisted suicide. I'm not arguing to you that consent is a defense to murder. But I am telling you, when you think of it from the perspective of the sailors at the time, their belief was reasonable that throwing Jonah overboard would save their lives. In fact, the commentator Rashi said that the sailors were able to see that the other boats were all in calm waters, and it was just theirs that was in trouble. And third question is, did they have any other alternative? Now, Professor Levinson wants to say they could have used floaties. Plastic was invented after World War II. To say that they could have been given floaties is the biblical equivalent of fake news. Indeed, the story tells you they did try alternatives. First, they tried to throw things overboard to lighten the weight of the ship. Then you're told later that even after Jonah said he wanted to be thrown overboard, that they tried to row in the other direction. At this point, they saw no alternative. Now, Professor Levinson says that you can't kill an innocent person to save the lives of others. I think it's a really interesting legal and moral question. When is it appropriate to take life of one person to save a much larger number of lives? But you don't need to get to that question here, because it's clear that Jonah is not an innocent person. Now, Professor Levinson wants to point to the text where the sailors say, and she quotes this to you, "Do not hold us guilty of killing an innocent person." Well, first, the sailors aren't the ones who make the determination whether Jonah is guilty or innocent in this instance. They don't have all the facts. They don't know the extent to which Jonah is responsible. You have to decide, is Jonah responsible here for what happened? It's clear that Jonah felt he was responsible. That's why he said, "Throw me overboard." Jonah didn't see himself as an innocent person. But most of all, this text makes clear that Jonah is not an innocent person. Who's responsible for setting all of this in motion? Jonah is responsible. As Rabbi Feinstein said, this is a story that's read every year on Yom Kippur in the afternoon. Why is that? I think it is because it is a story about responsibility. And ultimately, the question you have to ask is, who was responsible in this circumstance? Was it the sailors? Weren't they truly innocent in all of this? Wasn't it Jonah who was really responsible for putting all of this in motion? In light of that, it can't be said that Jonah is this innocent person Professor Levinson describes. In light of all of this, the only conclusion is that the sailors acted reasonably under the circumstances. And in light of that, there's only one possible verdict: not guilty.
Professor Levinson, your rebuttal.
Serena, it's your turn. Just kidding. That's good right there. Yeah, how many would like Serena to do the rebuttal? Well, she's been helping. In fact, she's been fantastic. So I don't want you to feel any guilt, but when a young woman like that puts in the energy she has into this trial, it is something to be considered. 1 minute, I have to consult my brains. Anything else? Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, I don't know what to say. I think the legal term is fair. There we go. It's fair to say that in this case, the defense is all wet. And it's all wet, frankly, for the three things that Irwin talked about, which is the facts, the law, and as they apply to this case. So let me start with the facts. It's not me recognizing that Jonah's innocent. It was the sailors. And they knew they would get in trouble because they knew the law said that no matter how scared you are and how much you'd like to put your life ahead of someone else, that is not how the law works. And in fact, when you get those instructions from the judge, which I'll go over in a minute, it's going to talk about not just necessity, not what your urges are, not what you feel would be reasonable for you, but it is under the heading of self-defense. And here you did not have Jonah attacking anyone. He was just sleeping. Facts. Do they throw him overboard? Yes, they did. Did they have other choices to do? Well, they had a choice, which was, in life, sometimes we have to weather the storms together. And they could have done things in this situation to help everybody get out of it alive. And that's what the law would require, and that's what we call reasonable. They could have said, time to repent, O Jonah. They could have said, time to return. Just turn the boat around. That's not so hard. Or they could have said, Jonah, this cannot be on us, because we know the law would find us, what was the word in the text? Guilty, if we did this. But you can make your own decisions. They can request. Now, we get to the law. And I would certainly say to you, any law you would respect is the law that applies here. And it says, beware of scapegoating. We do not allow under the law for a group of people, no matter how formish they are, and you know what that means, right? To say that I think it's reasonable to put my life ahead of another. There's not a necessity of defense. What about this idea of the burden of proof? You know, he says that every year, like it's something magical. Like you have to prove it beyond a reasonable doubt. And I think that Irwin just thinks that beyond a reasonable doubt means what the OJ jury thought beyond a reasonable doubt meant. But you know, every day in this city, people take a look at the facts, and they look at the law, and they look at the language in the text. And I need a volunteer. Linda Deutsch, thank you for volunteering. On your feet. Read for me line 14 in your loud. Oh, you don't have it there? Today would be a good day, Linda. Can you read line 14 for me? It starts with, and we'll read it with you, in fact. Are we ready? It starts with, you there yet? And your glasses on. That's okay. You know, we got lots of time. Ready? Then they cried out to the Lord. Lead us, Linda. Oh, please. Oh, please. Oh, please, Lord. Are you with me? Everybody else, Linda will catch up. There we go. Bingo. Do not hold us, give her a hand, guilty of an innocent life. And I accept. Turn the lights down, my makeup's not that good. I accept this burden of proof. But burden of proof has always meant, what does your common sense tell you? Not what you think emotionally, sympathetically, what might make you popular with the most prominent dean in Southern California. Oh, I take that back. We have another one here today, I think. And in fact, when we get to the third part of his argument, that was particularly troubling. He said the law that it applies. And we are in a California court. You're going to hear a California instruction. And of course, Irwin lectured to us on the law from that California professor, Rashi. But Rashi is not the law. And Rashi is not subject to cross-examination. And Rashi knew the importance of the words of the text and the nuance of the law. Now, I heard Irwin say, you know what, they didn't have these plastic floaties back then. And my first question is, how does he know? But what did they have? They had wood. They had parts of the ship. They had things that they could throw over to help him. They were willing to jettison that cargo anyway. But is there one word in the text about anything that's done to keep Jonah from certain death? And there isn't, because the message is clear. They were not only prepared, but they intended for him to die, go away, let us go on with our own life. In this case, originally, the defense had wanted a lesser included instruction. That has been dropped. We're not talking about anyone acting in heat of passion. They dropped that defense. This was all intentional. Oh, we'll come back to that. This is all about taking an innocent life. And so I want to end with what Irwin said. And I'm looking at the notes from my fabulous law clerk. When he got to the part where he said, oh, he was morally guilty. And God bless Serena Davis, who wrote, irrelevant. Oh, she wrote more than that. She wrote, irrelevant, it's still attempted murder. And she's right, because this is not Yom Kippur. We're not sitting in the shul right now beating and clapping our chest and saying, gee, did Jonah do a good thing, a bad thing? Are these sailors immoral or not moral? We are here indeed for what Irwin talked about, which is taking responsibility for your actions, taking responsibility for picking up a person you recognize as innocent, whether or not anyone else would, and throwing them to their death. That, ladies and gentlemen, is a crime of attempted murder, and that makes the defendant guilty. Thank you.
Thank you, Dean Chemerinsky. Your closing rebuttal.
Well, Professor Levinson invokes the O.J. case. Do you remember Cato Kalin from the O.J. case? Wasn't he really proof that Gilligan and Ginger did sleep together? I divided my presentation to you into 3 parts. First, I said, what happened? And again, there she goes with the alternative facts. I think all you need to know in terms of what happened is that Jonah defied God. There's no dispute as to that. And that as a result, God unleashed this terrible storm that put in jeopardy the boat, the sailors, and the other passengers. And in fact, Jonah himself recognizes that he's responsible. It's interesting how Professor Levinson does some selective reading to you. But right before where she read and did her responsive reading with the congregation, it says, Jonah answered, heave me overboard and the sea will come down for you. For I know that this terrible storm came upon you on my account. Jonah is not the innocent that Professor Levinson wants to describe. Jonah is responsible for this storm that put in danger the lives of these sailors and all of those passengers. Those are the facts, because that's the record that's before you. So then you get to the second part of my presentation, the law. And again, we heard some alternative law here. The title of the defense that's going to be read to you is Justifiable Homicide, self-defense, and then Professor Levinson didn't read the next 4 words, or defense of another. And the question here is, did the sailors act reasonably to protect themselves and to protect the lives of another? And the law that you're to apply isn't what Professor Levinson told you. It's not what I told you. It's what Judge Pines tells you. And I'll read you the same thing that he did. The defendants are not guilty of attempted murder or attempted voluntary manslaughter if they were justified in an attempt to kill someone in self-defense or defense of another. The defendants acted in lawful self-defense or defense of another if 1, the defendants reasonably believed that they or someone else was in imminent danger of being killed or suffering great bodily harm. 2, the defendants reasonably believed the immediate use of deadly force was necessary to defend against that danger. And 3, the defendants used no more force than was reasonably necessary to defend against that danger. And we don't look at it from our perspective today. We try to imagine what it was like for the sailors on that ship at the time in assessing whether it's reasonable. And the notion of reasonable doubt is not a technicality. It's integral to our legal system. And you'll be instructed that if you have reasonable doubt, the only possible verdict, the only just verdict, is not guilty. So now you know the law, and now you know the facts. And so now you can apply that law to those facts. And so you have to ask those three questions. First, did the sailors reasonably believe that their lives and the lives of others were in danger? And the text tells you that. The text tells you right at the outset that the ship was in danger of breaking up. You're told even after that, the sea became more and more stormy. Second, did they have reason to believe that throwing Jonah overboard would save their lives and the lives of others? Again, the text tells you that. Jonah told the sailors that he was responsible, and throwing them overboard would be the way to save their lives, the lives of others in the ship. And then third, was there an alternative? Now, it's interesting, in her rebuttal, Professor Levinson said, quote, they could have turned the boat around, but the text tells you they tried to do just exactly that. Nevertheless, the men rowed hard to regain the shore, but could not, for the sea was growing more and more stormy. Now, I think, Professor Levinson, it is a reasonable assumption that in biblical times, plastic didn't exist. But, she says to me, I'm making things up. How could I know? Professor Levinson, how could you know that they had a stool like this on board that they could have thrown? You're told they tried the alternatives. There's no alternative that was there. And again, we look at it from their perspective at the moment. What could they do to save their lives and the lives of the passengers? Well, ultimately, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I think this comes down to the question of, do you perceive Jonah as responsible? Or do you see him, as Professor Levinson says, as the person who's really innocent of all of this? Now, her key evidence in terms of innocence is a sentence where she had everyone read it aloud. But the sentence has much more ambiguity than she is willing to concede. It says, do not us hold us guilty of killing an innocent person. And she says, see, the sailors thought he was innocent. I could read that quite differently, saying, Lord, don't hold us guilty of killing an innocent person, because he wasn't an innocent person. He's responsible for all of this. He himself said that he's responsible for this when he said, quote, this terrible storm came upon you on my account. But really, it's not for the sailors, it's not for Jonah to decide. It's really a question for you to decide. Imagine that you were in the situation of the sailors at that moment. Imagine that you feared that your ship was going to be broken up, that many others were going to die. What's reasonable to do under those circumstances? If you conclude, as I think you must, that they reasonably believed they were in imminent danger, they reasonably believed throwing Jonah overboard could save their lives, and they reasonably saw no other alternative, then the appropriate thing in morality and in law is not guilty.
Thank you. So, ladies and gentlemen, it's now my role to instruct you on the law. And what I'm reading from are actual California instructions of law. For those of you who are lawyers or know something about our system of justice, we're not worrying about things like jurisdiction or the statute of limitations. We're trying these people in the state of California under California law. And what I'm reading to you is not the alternative law, it is the law of the state of California. So you must decide what the facts are. It's up to all of you and you alone to decide what happened based on the evidence that has been presented to you in this trial. You must follow the law as I explain it to you, even if you disagree with it. If you believe that the attorney's comments on the law conflict with my instructions, you must follow my instructions. So the first instruction is instruction which we utilize. It's from a form book, 103, Reasonable Doubt. And this is the traditional instruction that is given in every criminal case in this state. A defendant in a criminal case is presumed to be innocent. This presumption requires that the people prove a defendant guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. Proof beyond a reasonable doubt is proof that leaves you with an abiding conviction that the charge is true. The evidence need not eliminate all possible doubt because everything in life is open to some possible or imaginary doubt. Unless the evidence proves the defendant guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, he is entitled to an acquittal, and you must find him not guilty. The next instruction is the form instruction 600, attempted murder. And here are the elements. The defendants are charged with attempted murder. To prove that a defendant is guilty of attempted murder, the people must prove that 1, the defendant took at least one direct but ineffective step toward killing another person, and 2, the defendant intended to kill that person. A direct step indicates a definite and unambiguous intent to kill. It is a direct movement toward the commission of the crime after preparations are made. The next instruction, as mentioned, is the instruction 505 entitled Justifiable Homicide, Self-Defense, or Defense of Another. The defendants are not guilty of attempted murder or attempted voluntary manslaughter if they were justified in attempting to kill someone in self-defense or defense of another. The defendants acted in lawful self-defense or defense of another if 1, the defendants reasonably believed that they or someone else was in imminent danger of being killed or suffering great bodily injury. 2, the defendants reasonably believed that the immediate use of deadly force was necessary to defend against that danger. And 3, the defendants used no more force than was reasonably necessary to defend against that danger. Belief in future harm is not sufficient, no matter how great or how likely the harm is believed to be. The defendants must have believed there was imminent danger of death or great bodily injury to themselves or someone else. The defendant's belief must have been reasonable, and they must have acted only because of that belief. The defendants are only entitled to use that amount of force that a reasonable person would believe is necessary in the same situation. If the defendants used more force than was reasonable, the attempted killing was not justified. When deciding whether the defendant's beliefs were reasonable, consider all the circumstances as they were known to and appeared to the defendants, and consider what a reasonable person in a similar situation with similar knowledge would have believed. If the defendant's beliefs were reasonable, the danger does not need to have actually existed. The people have the burden of proving that the attempted killing was not justified. If the people have not met this burden, you must find the defendants not guilty of attempted murder. So, those are the instructions of law. Your role is now to deliberate and to reach your decision. Once you've reached your decision, the verdict will be announced. So, as I understand it, you're to pass either the blue card or the orange card to the aisle. And again, just so it's clear, the orange card would be a finding of guilty. The blue card is a finding of not guilty. So please make your decision and pass the form to the aisle. They'll be collected and counted.
Do you have a deeper understanding of this part of our narrative and our story? Good, good. Judge Pines has allowed me to say that the court is back in session.
Thank
Okay.
you. Good morning.
I understand that a verdict has been reached, and Mr. Goldstein is going to announce the verdict.
Thank you, Judge. Hillside Memorial Park and Mortuary is grateful for the opportunity to sponsor this iconic event for so many years. And on behalf of our entire organization, I would like to thank everyone involved. You have educated us, made us think, and of course, made us laugh. Please join me in another round of applause to thank everyone for their commitment to this program. The 14th Annual Biblical Trial, the People versus the Sailors for attempted murder. You, the jury, find the sailors not guilty.